Have you ever wondered where your pelvic floor is, what it's supposed to do, how to strengthen it, how to relax it, how to tell what's wrong with yours? This video is for you. In the next 10 minutes, we're going to go through all of that, and I'm going to give you 3 things everybody needs to know how to do with their pelvic floor. So let's have a look at what our pelvic floor looks like. So our pelvic floor is basically a bowl of muscles that sits in the very bottom of your pelvis. It supports everything that sits inside. So our bladder sits inside there, our uterus sits inside there, as well as our bowel sit inside. Our urethra, where our pee exits out from, exits out through the muscle. Our vaginal canal also exits out through the muscle, as does our rectum exit out through the muscle. So our pelvic floor can have a lot to do with any of those 3 functions. Peeing, pooping, things exiting our vagina, like having a baby, or things entering our vagina, like having intercourse. So a Kegel is the name given to a contraction of our pelvic floor muscle. Just like we can contract our bicep, we can contract our pelvic floor. So it squeezes and then lifts up on the inside when it contracts. So squeezes and then lifts. If it's a little bit weaker, that squeeze will be a little bit weaker as well. Or you might actually even lose the ability to do the lifting part if it's weak enough. So when something needs to exit our pelvis, like peeing, pooping, having a baby, or even passing gas, our pelvic floor needs to fully relax. When it does that, the muscle will lower and open up. When we don't want things to exit from our pelvis, like holding back a toot, holding back poop, or trying to stop your flow of urine, our pelvic floor will squeeze and lift to try to kink off that urethra or rectum to prevent anything coming out when we don't want it to. So just like any other muscle, your pelvic floor can be weak, but it can also be too tight or be carrying too much tension in it. It can also have both. Some signs of having too much tension or tightness in your pelvic floor is pain with intercourse, frequent urination, strong urges to urinate, a slow flow of your pee coming out, having urinary incontinence, having difficulty passing stool or having constipation, and then even having low back, glute, or tailbone pain are some signs of having tightness in your pelvic floor. Signs that your pelvic floor might be weak are having things like urinary incontinence, failing to reach the toilet in time when you have to pee, even wiping several times after a bowel movement is a sign of having weakness in your pelvic floor. Passing wind from either your anus or your vagina, especially things like bending forward or lifting. Reduced sensation in your vagina area, having tampons that dislodge or fall out, having a distinct bulging sensation in your vaginal canal area, and then also just having a feeling of heaviness or aching in your vaginal area are all signs of having weakness in your pelvic floor. And you may have a combination of both. Okay, let's try doing a Kegel now. So I want you to think about lifting your vagina and your rectum up towards your nose from the inside only. So you shouldn't be squeezing your bum, you shouldn't be squeezing your legs together, you shouldn't be tilting through your pelvis. Pretend someone is watching you and you don't want them to know what you're doing. You can also think about sitting on the toilet and you're trying to stop your flow of urine partway through. This is your pelvic floor. You should feel a tightening and then a lifting up inside. If you're not feeling that lift, that could be a bit of a hint that your pelvic floor is a little bit weaker. If you put your hand on your belly while you do it, you should feel your belly pull in gently when you're contracting your pelvic floor. So that's how you do a Kegel, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the best way to strengthen your pelvic floor. Our pelvic floor is part of our inner core. Our inner core is made up of 4 different muscles. Our diaphragm, which is our breathing muscle, our pelvic floor, our transverse abdominal, and our multifidus. They basically form a box around us, and their job is to work together to support our spine, our pelvis, and to keep us continent. So those muscles are supposed to work together in a coordinated fashion to do those things. So if they stop working together, this can cause pelvic floor dysfunction, and it might not even be that your pelvic floor is weak, it's just not working together with the rest of your core. Okay, let's do a test and see if your core is coordinating. So we're going to use our breathing, which is our diaphragm muscle, and our pelvic floor to see if you're functioning properly. So our pelvic floor and our diaphragm, they're the only 2 muscles that go horizontally through us. They're supposed to work together, and the way that they go up and down together with our breathing. So when one goes up, the other goes up. When one goes down, the other goes down. So I want you to put a hand on your belly. You're going to take a nice deep breath in, which uses that diaphragm muscle, our breathing muscle. And then you're going to blow out through a straw. So deep breath in I want you to take note at what your hand does that's on your belly. Does it push out when you're breathing out, or does it pull in when you're breathing out? Let's try that again. Nice deep breath in. Breathe out through a straw. So if your core is functioning properly together in its coordinated way, your hand should pull inwards on your belly. That's showing that your pelvic floor is contracting with your transverse abdominis against that contraction of your diaphragm. Another hint to this would be if you're leaking urine with a cough or a sneeze, that's a sign that your core is not coordinated. If we think about what a cough or a sneeze is, it's a really strong exhale. When we're exhaling, our diaphragm is rising back up, helping to push the air out. That means our pelvic floor should also be lifting. And we know from what we're learning earlier that when our pelvic floor lifts, it's contracting into that Kegel, which is also helping prevent anything from coming out of it. So if we're coughing and sneezing and leaking urine, it means that that pelvic floor is not engaging with your diaphragm when you're coughing and sneezing. So the first and very most important thing everybody needs to know how to do with their pelvic floor is relax it. A lot of the times it's not an issue if your pelvic floor is weak, it's that you don't know how to let it go and relax. How do you think your arm would feel if you were holding and carrying it around like this all day? It would not be very happy, and neither is your pelvic floor. So let's teach it how to relax. Okay, so child's pose is a great position to get into to practice some of your pelvic floor relaxation or pelvic floor lowering. So here I want you to picture that bowl of muscles lowering down or expanding out the bottom of your pelvis. So we're going to use that deep inhale, which we know lowers our diaphragm as our air or our lungs fill with air. So a deep breath in. Picture that pelvic floor lowering or bulging down into the bottom. Picture your air going all the way down towards that pelvic floor. Let it put a little bit of pressure in your rectum or in your bum area. Picture your tailbone pushing out of the way at the back. If you feel nothing at all, I want you to try with the same time as your inhale. So inhale, then do a teeny tiny little push down through your pelvic floor, like you're pushing out a bowel movement or pushing out a toot gently. Inhale, expand. So that is what it feels like for your pelvic floor to be lowering or relaxing. So second thing is to contract your pelvic floor, and we already talked about that. So it's that Kegel contraction, that isolating your pelvic floor into a squeeze and lift. So thinking about lifting your vagina rectum to your nose, thinking about stopping your flow of urine or holding back a toot. Okay, number 3, we're going to learn how to coordinate your pelvic floor. So this is where we're going to get your diaphragm, your pelvic floor, your transverse abdominal muscle all working together, working on that coordination as it should. Okay, easiest place to start this is laying down on your back. We're going to use that nice big deep inhale, thinking about lowering that pelvic floor just like we did in step number 1. And then we're going to add that exhale, Kegel at the same time. Sometimes it helps to place a hand on your chest, a hand on your belly. So when we inhale in, our belly should rise, our pelvic floor should lower, and then we're going to exhale and Kegel, and your belly should pull inwards. Nice deep breath in to your belly, into your pelvic floor. Exhale, Kegel. You can also put your hand on your rib cage to make sure that your rib cage is expanding nicely with your inhale. Nice deep breath into your rib cage. Lower that pelvic floor. Exhale, Kegel. Belly should pull inwards. This is making our pelvic floor and diaphragm lower together and rise together to coordinate that core like it should. Thanks for watching, and I hope you learned something about your pelvic floor today. Download my free guide that's going to take you more in depth to learn about your own pelvic floor and some of the issues you might be having. You can also check out my online program that's going to take you through step-by-step resolving your own pelvic floor issues depending on the problems you might be having. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos, and you can check out my pelvic floor strengthening video here if you want some ideas in terms of doing some more strengthening.